So okay. Well, good morning, everybody. Beautiful, beautiful day out there. This is Mary Lou and this is Melanie down at the Box of Books with our, I think it's number 5 of Grow Your Own Zoom Talk.
So fast.
Yes, it goes flying by.
I can't believe it's June already.
Just wait till you get older. It'll go even faster. Time is not exact. It's very relative.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Melanie, the Master Gardeners, one of the directors down in Belmont, connected to Cornell Cooperative Extension, was not aware that this program was, I say, put up in the sky. What do we do with it? So you can watch it.
And
Yeah. Okay. So you can watch after the fact. You don't have to tune in and participate now, although we'd love to have you do that. So will you explain how they find out how to watch it?
Yes. So there are a couple different ways. They all take you back to YouTube. So the library has a YouTube channel, Alfred Box of Books Library. You can find that link directly on our webpage on the right-hand side, down towards the bottom. There's a YouTube link. There's also a green Learn More button. If you click that, you'll be able to go into adult programs, and then Grow Your Own will be listed there.
Okay, Christian, did you hear all that, or should we repeat it so that Lynn knows how to listen to the recorded sessions?
Hi,
Hi.
how are you? Even I was trying to find this link. Well, I had it from before, but in the library monthly schedule, there is not, for this month, there is no links available for the workshop series.
Yeah, I don't have the calendar done, but to see the ones in the past, you can click on the YouTube link and see all the ones that we've done. That's what we were talking about.
Okay.
To see the past ones. Yep.
Okay, we'll try and get them online sooner so people can know ahead of time, but that doesn't always happen because poor Melanie has a million things to do, and sometimes she just can't do it all timely enough for everybody. So we do the best we can.
Okay.
All righty. Now, did we get any questions from people? No questions out there. All right. So we don't have to deal with that, except Rima had one quick question about watering. And if you have what I would call very tender plants, like your tomatoes, peppers, watermelons, winter squash, things that really love warm or even hot weather. Most of us who live in the country have well water, which runs around 50 degrees Fahrenheit. So here is your lovely tomato plant that you've just put out there, or maybe even later in the summer when we have a dry spell. You get out your hose, you turn it on, and out comes the 50-degree Fahrenheit water, which the tomatoes' roots are going to say, what is this? It's too cold. So what I used to do was, if I had to in a dry year, I'd have several buckets and I'd fill them up in the morning and let them sit in the sun all day, and then hand water in the evening when they had risen in temperature, probably to about what it was. If it was 80 outside, maybe the water would be, I don't know, 70 or so. And that did me just fine. So if you're thinking down the line, if and when we get that drought and you want to water your warm, very tender plants, even if you're on city water, chances are that's still somewhat cool. Fill up a couple of buckets in the morning, let them sit around and absorb all that heat from the day, and then water in the late in the day or early in the evening. Okay, so Rima, does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, she's hanging out, taking care of library business. Before we move to today's topic, I ran out of time last time to talk about rhubarb. Do we have that picture somewhere? Melanie, can you find it? Rima, I came in a little early and Rima found a few photos for me so you can see what we're talking about.
I cannot minimize Zoom.
What does that mean?
Oh, while I'm recording, I can't get the desktop. Oh,
why is that? We've done it before. We're gonna argue with the computer here for a few minutes. Make it do what there it is. Good deal, Melanie.
So we gotta make it so he can see it.
Oh, so he can see it. All right. And future observers.
Can you see the rhubarb?
Christian?
Okay, yeah.
Yes. Oh, okay. You moved him over here. Well, this is a very puny looking rhubarb plant. Anybody that has grown rhubarb for a few years, and if it's in a happy situation, it gets pretty huge. So here's what I've written down. If you want to plant one crown of rhubarb to make one plant, consider 4 feet by 4 feet, because that's at least what it's going to grow into after, say, 3 years. No, it's like buying shoes for your teenager. You got to plan ahead because it grows and fills out. It's a hardy perennial. It loves the cool weather. You really can't grow these in Florida or San Diego, I don't believe. And if you did, I don't think they taste that good. It's a plant that will thrive in partial shade. It produces edible stalks, those red stems that you see, for us here in Allegheny County, from May through June. You only eat the stalks. I had a quiz last week with some people that were here about, what do you call rhubarb? And almost everybody said, oh, it's a fruit, because we tend to use it in pies and crumbles or make jam out of it. Somebody actually said a berry, which of course is not a berry, but in truth, it's a vegetable, because it's like celery. We eat the stems. All right, you do not want to eat the leaves in your salad, because they contain, I believe it's oxalic acid. It probably won't kill you, but you probably will get a stomach ache. However, you can put the leaves on the compost heap, because it seems that whatever is harmful to us either dissipates in the composting process and doesn't linger on. Let's see. Usually towards the end of May, early in June, depending on the season, one of the stalks will send up a flower head. We do not want flowers. Okay, so you just cut that off, that thick stem low down towards the crown. And usually a nice, healthy 3, 4, 5, 25-year-old clump will send up 1, 2, 3, 4 flower stalks early in June. Just cut them off, toss them in the compost heap. What else? Oh, if you've never harvested rhubarb, what you got to do is, there you've got, and you don't do it till the 3rd year. It's sort of like asparagus. It takes time to get established. So if you plant it this year, it'll be 2 more years before you can start harvesting. And you go for the thickest, tallest stems. Now, one year I was real eager. I hadn't frozen enough rhubarb, so I had run out like in February. So I really wanted a rhubarb pie. So as soon as the stalks were like 6 inches high, you tug them. You slide your hand down, or both hands, close to the bottom. You give a quick yank. And almost always then it separates out from the crown. It doesn't break off. You don't want a broken off stem. Well, you know, they just didn't have that rhubarb taste at 6. You really have to let them grow a bit. I would say to a foot or even 18 inches long. Go for the fattest ones first and tug out. It takes about 5 stems to make a pie. It freezes really, really well. Hint, whenever you're making applesauce or rhubarb sauce, or I suppose any kind of sauce, you cook it down with the barest amount of water in the bottom so it doesn't stick on the pot. Don't add your sugar till you're done boiling. It takes about, if you slice it with a scissor into inch-long strips, it takes 5 minutes on medium heat with just a tiny bit of water in the bottom. Then I turn it off. You got to watch it. From 5 minutes to 5.5, all of a sudden, especially if you have a good-sized pot full, it'll bubble up and over and make a mess on your stove. So watch it that last minute when it's almost all soft. then dump your sugar in, stir it around, and then you can either store it in the fridge to eat or in a carton to freeze. What else? Rhubarb. I mulch it with at least 4 inches of whole leaves around. Now in the old days, rhubarb, in the old days, everybody had a horse. Almost everybody had a horse in their backyard. So you had horse manure. So you waited till November, so maybe even late November for us now. All the leaves are gone. The crown's there, a couple inches under the ground. They used to dump on a mature plant a bushel of old horse manure that's been sitting around outside for a few months, so it's not real hot. So they're heavy feeders. So we don't have horses in our backyard, most of us, anymore. Maybe you could double check this. I couldn't swear to it because I don't fertilize mine. But if you're into fertilizer, look it up online. I'm guessing an all-round 10-10-10 or 5-5-5, according to directions, sprinkled around in late March if you add chemical fertilizer. The leaves I just pile on in the fall. And as anybody who has seen my garden, if what's her name was listening, they came by early in May and couldn't believe how large my rhubarb was at that point. I don't seem to have any problem with deer eating it or bugs. So it just grows with my leaf mulch. All right, I'm done on rhubarb. Anybody have questions on rhubarb? Rima, questions on rhubarb? Poor Rima's got to work, wherever she is.
No.
Okay, so part 1 of our talk for today is weeds. As I jokingly said, it's what we all love to do, right? You love to weed? No, of course not. All righty. There's a famous saying out there. I don't know if you've heard this one, Christian. 1 year's seeding, 7 years weeding, which indicates that if you don't want the weeds to take over, and one of the reasons they're weeds is they take over. They're not fussy, they're not particular, they don't need to be coddled, they do their own thing all by themselves very, very well. So you have to get them out before they go to seed, or you'll be doing it for 7 or more years. And I have the famous story about the lemon up somewhere in northern Canada. At least 1,000 years ago, this little lemon was running around, and they gather all sorts of seeds and grasses during the brief summer up there on the tundra, and they bury it in their burrow, and then they semi-hibernate all winter long, eating this up. Well, this poor fellow died in his winter abode with all his seeds, including the Arctic lupin flower. 1,000 years later, some archaeologists were digging around in the permafrost up there, and lo and behold, they found this mummified skeleton, carcass, whatever, of the lemon, and all these seeds. So one bright fellow said, I wonder if they would still grow. So they planted them. Well, the lupin grew and bloomed after at least 1,000 years there in the permafrost. So you want to weed before they seed, or who knows how long they will live in your soil. Okay. When I put this session together, I thought I'll get some pictures of weeds. And then I thought, no, there are too many of them, and everybody's garden is different. So I decided the definition for me of a weed is anything that's growing in your veggie garden that doesn't belong there. If you planted a row of beets, and a row of carrots, and some lettuce, and all of a sudden other things start popping up either in the row, because you don't mulch, or in between your beets and carrots, consider it a weed and pull it out. All righty. There are 3 basics about weeding. And if you follow these, it'll be so much easier, Melanie. You won't hate weeding nearly as much. First of all, anything that's out of place, doesn't matter what it is. If you didn't plant it and you don't want it, then it's considered a weed in your garden. Number two, get them while they're small. If it's this tall, 2 inches tall, chances are the roots are only 2 or 3 inches tall, and they will come out much more easily than if the roots have gone down 8 inches. Number two, if the soil is wet or damp, it's so much easier to pull them out or hold them lightly if you're not mulching. One of the problems we'll get to dandelions in a minute, which are the bane of my existence. By the way, do you know how, Christian, do you know how dandelions came to North America? It was all the fault of the Roman legions back 2,000 years ago. Well, 1,800 years ago, when Rome began to expand north into Europe, and the Roman legions marched all the way to England, and they loved their salad. And part of their salad greens were dandelion greens. And there were no dandelions in the middle and northern Europe. So they brought the seeds with them and they planted it along the roads so that they could have dandelion greens for their salad. And then once it got established in England, when they came over here in the 1600s with their cereals, their corn, their wheat, their barley, the dandelion seeds were mixed in with that. And that's how we got our dandelions. So you can blame it on the Roman legions. Anyway, anybody that's ever tried to pull up, dandelions, by the way, are biennials. I think that's true. They don't bloom till the next second year. Anyway, they have long tap roots. Depending on how good your soil is, the longer they will be. And if you simply try and pull them up, even if the soil is wet, they break off. Does not deter the dandelion from, wouldn't be nice if our teeth did that. The root will regrow the dandelion. So for dandelions and other deep-rooted perennial or biennial weeds, you need a long knife to wiggle down, loosen up the soil, and then pull out the whole thing. But I'm getting ahead of my story. Most of the weeds, now I'm talking about a garden that's established. We're not starting from scratch here. So you already have a garden that's mostly soil, plus what you plant. So most of the weeds in that garden are going to be annuals. And annuals almost always need sunshine or light to germinate. So if they're in the dark, they won't germinate, which is why you put down at least a 2-inch mulch in at least, we'll talk about when later when we talk about mulching, in your vegetable garden come early June. You mulch it with 2 inches everywhere, more in the paths, and then those annual weed seeds will just never germinate. That doesn't mean that when you uncover the mulch, they won't, because they also last for years sometimes. Okay. Or if some pop up, even if you have a mulch, some will pop up. You simply be sure to weed them out before they flower. As soon as you see those flowers, get them out of there before they're pollinated and set seeds. Okay, some weeds that invade your garden. Think of the Roman legions again, invading from the edges, especially if your garden is in the middle of a lawn. There are certain kinds of weeds that spread not so much by seeds, self-sowing, but by their root system extending outward and growing into the edge of your garden. Some of these are quackgrass, gill over the mountain. Maybe we should get some pictures next time of these. Creeping Jenny. Okay, anything that has creeping in its title or weed in its title, like goatweed or bugleweed, you don't want to really plant those. So here we have a problem with, if your garden sits in the middle of the lawn, every year you're going to have a problem with those weeds growing into your lawn. And you can't just pull them out. You've got to get the root system out. So there's lots of ways you can deal with this. A lot of people buy what is called edging, 6 to 8 inches, I suppose even 12 inches deep, of plastic and or maybe metal. And you just jam it down into your soil at the edge of your garden. And the idea is it'll keep those roots out. I don't believe it. I've tried it. Doesn't work after a year or two. It costs money. Da, 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 da. So here's my method, which if you're not going to live there for quite a while, maybe you don't want to invest in the time because it's more time than money. Around all my vegetable garden and around the perimeter perennial borders around my house, and that adds up to about 200 feet. Over the years, I dug a trench at the edge of the lawn that went down about 6 inches and was 6 to 8 inches wide. And I filled that trench with sand. We have a wonderful place right here in Alpha Station. You can work out a deal with them. Bring your boxes, your shovel, pay them a little bit of money, whatever. Trade them some jam or homemade bread, whatever. And you can dig yourself a couple of boxes of sand and fill that trench 6 inches deep by 8 inches wide with sand, a band of sand. The reason I do this is anybody has ever tried to dig sod out of dirt, clay dirt especially, it's tough going. But to dig it out of sand is easy. So what I do once or maybe twice a year. If you only do it once a year, I would do it in March as soon as the ground thaws and before you get real busy in the garden. You go around with your long handle, sharp shovel, and you just wherever say it's grown 3 or even 4 inches into that sand band. So right at the edge where the dirt ends and the sand begins, you slice straight down or at a slight angle with your shovel. And that doesn't take that long. And divide it up. If you have 200 feet like me, I don't do it all at once. All right, divide it up. Then go back with your spading fork, slide it in at an angle, lift it up, flip it over. And do this in the morning of a sunny day, sunny and windy. And if it's not mucky, wet soil, by the end of the day, it should be dry enough, especially since it's sandy. If it's really wet, let it, and look at the weather report, do it on a day where there's going to be 2 clear, non-rainy days. Then by the end of the second day, all that sod that you flipped, which is mostly sand and the roots of the grass that's grown in, plus any weeds like gill over the mountain, shake it out and most of your sand will fall back down. Dump the roots and probably a little bit of your sand into a wheelbarrow and take it and dump it on the compost heap. After 2 or 3 years, you might have to replenish the sand a bit, but you're not losing it. It's in the compost heap and it will go back into your garden as part of your compost in the fall. So that's how I keep those roots from growing into my garden. Now, it's really important. I have one section of juniper that's only 6 inches high, and I planted it 35 or so years ago, 30 years ago, say, and it's taken a while, but now those 2 beds have really spread out. They are easily twice as big as these 2 tables in 2 sections. Don't let the grass grow into them, because if you do, it's going to be a hell of a job getting it out. And you got to keep an eye on it, because every now and again there's one you miss, one root, especially that quackgrass, and it will sneak maybe 8 inches or a foot in and then pop up a blade of grass. And it's like, oh, where'd you come from? Right? Okay. So as with anything in life, you got to pay attention. It's whether the puppy is being trained to not pee on your rug, you got to really watch that dog, right? Same thing with the weeds. You got to watch the weeds. Then to end this article on weeds, I decided if you really hate weeding, and I think most of us really don't like it, put on the earphones, stick the radio in the window, listen to music or something. Perhaps you're into Zen, think Zen thoughts. Solve all the problems of the world, figure out what you're going to make for dinner, whatever. Put your mind somewhere else, as long as your eyes are focusing on getting the weeds out. Any comments? You're sitting
It's a
there.
great time for listening to podcast.
Okay, explain your podcast again.
Oh,
you
no,
have more than this, right?
I just listen to podcasts when I'm
Doing
gardening or
that kind of work.
driving.
That is why traditionally all cultures for thousands of years have had work songs.
Mm.
You know, the poor slaves or the people out there picking the cotton. It's much easier if you're singing. Well, also the chanting keeps a rhythm going too for certain kinds of things. When I was teaching art, Christian, I had a photograph to illustrate Renaissance perspective, linear perspective. And it was a picture taken in the 40s out in California in the Big Valley, a bean field that I swear to God went 2 miles into the distance, because in the distance was a low ridge of mountains. And there was nothing but these rows of beans, which made wonderful linear perspective.
Oh, right.
But there, I don't know, a half a mile down into the field were like 12 laborers with their hoes standing, waiting to start hoeing the beans. Can you imagine? 12-hour day in the hot sun, hoeing the beans. All right, done with. Christian, do you have any questions about weeding before I move on?
No. So, well, there is a common question that some people ask sometime, and it's like, well, many people, they don't like to pull the weeds. And I have seen, and this is a common question about cutting the weeds. So I already know the answer for this, but this is a common question. So like, what about when the people just cut the weeds?
I think it's 6 of one, half dozen of the other. For me, it'd be quicker to just pull them out than to have the scissors and cut them off. And I think possibly some weeds, and I don't know which ones, might come back from the roots. Okay, however, if you don't like to weed, you will love mulching. And that's my next section here. What are we doing on time?
12:57, so about a half hour yet?
Half hour, good. All righty. Mulching. You all aren't old enough, but way back in the early 60s, there was a woman named Ruth Stout, and she had lived in New York City, and she and her husband decided to move to the country, which in those days was about 40 miles north only of New York City, up in Connecticut. They bought an old house and it had 2 acres. And of course, it was maybe 10 years after the end of the Second World War. So she wanted to have a vegetable garden. She was really excited about a vegetable garden. And one of the first things she did was put in a row of asparagus, 50 feet long. And in those days, everybody said, the authorities said, you've got to dig a trench 2 feet deep and 3 feet wide. Out of that experience came her seminal book, which I read in the early days and convinced me, called, and you might want to, even though it's somewhat dated, it's a good read still, How to Have a Green Thumb Without an Aching Back, because she was in her mid-40s at the time. And she became known as the Queen of Mulch, which in America in those days, people did not know about mulching. They didn't mulch. And nowadays, whenever I see a picture of a garden with bare dirt, it really looks ugly to me. It's like, why are you doing that? Because since then, in the last, 60 years, we've learned a lot of the advantages of having a mulch on your bare soil. So, and then if you look at Mother Nature, everywhere in the world, there's 100% mulch covering, except if there's been a fire recently or a flash floods recently. But everything else, Mother Nature covers up with the dead debris that builds up over time. So what to mulch and how to mulch. Here's just a real basic, some ideas. First, time to cover. We're not Mother Nature. Our gardens aren't the natural world. But if you have trees or shrubs or perennial border, then I think 100% of the time, all year, should have a mulch of one sort or another on top of it. And I think that probably it should be between 2 and 3 inches thick. That's this big to that big. And I would put it down in early November. Okay. It used to be earlier than that, but now we seem to have very lingering autumns. Our hard frost doesn't come usually sometime in the first half of October, which is like 1 to 3 weeks later than it used to be. And then it seems to linger on into even up to Thanksgiving before usually lately the snows come seriously. So if that is your long weather I mean, you want to do it before the blizzard and a foot of snow. I can see Melanie out there now, wrapped up in the wind and snow, and she's trying to put the leaves down and they're all blowing away. She's saying, why didn't I do this sooner? Okay, so check the long-term weather report for November, and sometime in November, probably before Thanksgiving, before hunting season, you'll be able to put down around those trees, shrubs, and perennials, you're 2 to 3 inches. Now, what do you put down? I happen to think that if it's a shrub border or trees, that the bark, either the nuggets or the shredded, look just fine. And they decompose more slowly, so they last longer. You don't have to replenish the whole 9 yards every year. Okay. And they just look, especially, if it's not walled, trees are spaced. So depending on what you do with ground covers and this and that, it's like a lawn in that it presents a background for your trees and shrubs and perennials. Now you don't have to use bark. We who live out in the country have access to our leaves. And if you have especially white pine trees, those long pine needles. So once again, I wouldn't bother mowing the leaves up in this case. I would just put down 2 to 3 inches. And then because I live on a windy hill, I find that just a dusting, that's probably not the right word, a scattering of the white pine needles holds everything down, keeps the leaves from blowing away. All righty, but we're going to talk now about the veggie garden. Some people believe that you should mulch all year round because this keeps, one, the soil doesn't freeze until later. It doesn't freeze as deeply. It encourages, therefore, all that soil life that we don't see, plus the worms, to live longer and at a higher level, because they all, especially the worms anyway, go down deeper and deeper to get away from the frost. In the old days in Allegheny County, the frost went down 4 feet, Christian, 4 feet, which meant when I built my house, you had to have the foundation cinder blocks 4.5 feet down because you wanted it below the freeze line so it wouldn't heave and crack your mortar. Well, I don't think it goes anywhere near that anymore. That'd be interesting to look up, Melanie. We'll look that up and see what the frost line is nowadays with global warming. However, there's also the school of thought that says, if at least your rows where you're going to sow your seeds and your transplants, the early ones in April, the later ones in late May, if you leave the rows exposed, especially in the old days when you spaded those rows and left the clumps sitting there, every time there was a frost and a thaw, which happens quite often that first month of late autumn, the freezing ice, the water in the soil would freeze and expand, and your soil would just crumble up. And come April, when it was time to plant, that raised row would just be beautifully crumbly soil. No lumps, no clumps. And once again, if Mother Nature will do it for you, Why should you do it? So I compromise. In late October, early November, I take leaves that are not mowed and put them down on my paths between the raised row beds to a depth of probably 6 inches. Some of the rows, then some of the beds that I'm going to plant later, like if you plant corn, tomatoes, pumpkins, etc., I sprinkle mowed leaves about 1 inch thick only on top of those. But the rows I'm going to plant early, the peas, the spinach, the carrots, the beets, radishes, I don't cover them up, and I let the frost action work on them. So it's a compromise between protecting it all. Now, I really, maybe in the fall, I'll talk about green manures, where you sow rye or other things to winter over in the soil, and why we do that, but that's not for today. Let me think. Then, say you decided, no, I'm going to sprinkle 2 inches over everything. I want it covered for the winter. Then come late March or early April, depending on the season, assuming the snow is gone, you're going to have to go out and either you marked the paths or you marked the rows so you know where to walk, right? Rake off into the paths any kind of leaves that you put over those rows for early planting, because one thing mulch does is keep the ground cool. And in the springtime, it's already cold. It's thawing out. Sometimes it isn't really thawed till early April. So rake those thin covering off to the paths, expose your early rows if you covered them up, so that a month later, by the middle of April, third week in April, you can plant your peas, etc. And the ground will have warmed up more than it would have otherwise. All righty. Then, after everything's been planted and the season is moving on and it's getting hotter, even though with this crazy weather, sometimes it's very hot early on and messes things up. What I do usually when the peas and the onions and the carrots and the beets, by the middle of May, they should be up a couple inches. Then I remulch them lightly, maybe 1 inch of mowed up leaves. You got a question?
No.
Oh.
Not for you.
So somebody's trying to get into
But
this and she can't get into
the
it.
warm crops, like the tomatoes and the peppers and the squashes, they didn't get put out until towards the end of May. So by the middle of June, they've begun to grow. Then I mulch them to keep the ground. Okay, we'll go into now that I've talked about how we do it, I'm going to talk about why we do it. Right now, wait a minute here. I got to find out why we do it. Guess what? I forgot when I redid my notes to put that down. So off the top of my head, why do we mulch? 1, keeps the weeds down. Less Zen meditation out in the garden, weeding. 2, if there's a drought, we really haven't had a drought in 3 years here, I think, it will retain your moisture from the rain. So it'll require not only less weeding time, but less watering time. And some of you, well, we all pay for our water, whether it's depreciation on the pump in the country or your fee to the village. You pay for the water. How much do you pay for your water, Russell? Do you know?
I don't.
You didn't know. Okay. But I bet you it's at least $20 a month off the
Yeah.
top of my head. Yeah.
I would think so.
Okay. And if you live in San Diego, it's horrendous.
Mm.
Okay. And the third reason we mulch is there are certain organisms in the soil. I believe they're more like fungus, or maybe bacterial. Kristen, you might know better than me, that splash up from the soil onto the leaves and can create certain diseases in 1 minute. And then also, if you grow spinach, lettuce, if you have a nice mulch, especially pine needles around it, you hardly have to wash it at all because they stay clean. Now, do you know what kind of soil organisms create problems by splashing up on the leaves, Christian, or not? I pick on people out of the blue that poor people don't know, or they don't know they're going to be asked this.
Oh yeah, I like all these plant pathology topics. So yeah, when it's by water, so the number ones being there are bacteria.
Bacteria, okay.
Bacteria. And if there is some fungus spores over
Mhm.
the leaves with water, they start growing. They are like
Okay.
activated again and start growing over the leaves.
So not only does a mulch keep all those organisms that live in your soil, not dirt, remember, soil, to make for happy, healthy, well, I won't say that, that's too anthropomorphic, healthy plants. The same thing, a mulch will help to keep them also healthier. All right. Any other questions on that before we move to our staking? What do we have, 10 minutes left?
About 20.
20. Okay. Can you bring up all those pictures at once that we found?
Not all at once, I can't.
Okay, we're going to bring up a series of pictures and then I'll just talk about various methods of staking certain plants. And whatever, I forget what order Rima got them in this morning. I think tomatoes were after the rhubarb. So let's look at the tomatoes first. All righty. Last time I mentioned there were two basic kinds of tomatoes. One were determinate that grow at about 4, maybe 5 feet high. They tend to produce their flowers and their fruit within like 1 month, 5-week time period. And then there's the indeterminates like Jack's beanstalk that just keep growing until a frost gets them. So that means if you're in Florida, you might have a tomato plant that's as old as you are. Well, I don't know if they live that long, but they will keep growing. And so you need a good stake is one way to do it. Maybe an 8-foot high stake shoved a foot or so into the ground. And as usually then we prune it to 1 or at most 2 stems that will grow up the pole, and you tie it every foot or so. And then you pinch out the little baby branches, sub branches that want to grow between the branch and the stem. Do it with your fingernails. And the indeterminates, if they start producing, Laura's started the July 4th and it was still going in the middle of October when we had that hard freeze. So it produced lots of tomatoes in that time. Now, some people use, I don't have a picture, some people get cages that are sort of like cylinders, maybe 18 inches diameter, pretty wide opening so you can stick your hand in to get the tomatoes. But I've just always used stakes like this. It saves space, obviously. All righty. What was our next? I don't think we did
bush bean.
Oh, pole bean. Oh, bush beans. Oh, okay.
Brush peas.
Peas. Was there anything else?
Cucumber.
Oh, did she find something for that? Because that's a little unusual.
Yes.
Ah, very good. Okay, another safe space saver is using a lattice of some sort. The ones I have, which I use for wind protection on my holly, are 4 feet by 4 feet, and they have smaller openings than the one you see here. But this would work. They can be plastic, they can be wood. You can, if you have a woods, cut down some saplings, tie them together, make your own, and pretend you're a Boy Scout, Girl Scout. Then you need 2 or 3 really strong supports. And obviously they should face south. You plant your cucumbers or pumpkins or winter squash or watermelon on the south side of this trellis. By a 4x4, I would just plant one in the middle. And as it grows, you might have to help it with some string tying here and there. When your fruits, cucumbers, I think you can just leave be because they're not that heavy, but these other things get heavy. Now, I have not bought a pair of stockings in 60 years, probably, but a lot of, do women still wear stockings?
I don't think
She
so.
doesn't. No, I started a trend. All right. No stockings. Well, when you go to the grocery store, sometimes you buy your oranges or your onions in a mesh bag. Mesh bags would be good. I suppose you could make some sacks out of cloth, not plastic. And as that fruit, whether it's a pumpkin or a butternut squash or a watermelon, not we can't grow the 20-pound watermelons up here in the cool climate still. So probably all those things would work. You want to slip it into the mesh bag really is best because the air, it can breathe, and tie it to the support because once again, if it's on the ground, it's fine. But when they're at this angle of about 45 degrees, they might fall off, slide down. So tying them up one way or another will help to keep them up in the air. Now,
what's the advantage of doing this as compared to just leaving them
space
to go?
That's the only thing. Space.
Oh, okay.
Space. My one little tiny butternut squash seed, if I let it have its way, and I started about a month before I planted out at the end. So like at the end of April indoors, planted out the end of May, maybe cover it up once or twice on a cold night. If I let it do its thing, by October, it's 20 feet in all directions. And I have 20 big butternut squash, which I don't really need. So for me, I let it go to like the 1st of August. And then those poor little ones that want to go this way, that way, I just snip them off. But if you love your cucumbers and you want a lot, and you don't, if you have a little garden, you don't have the space for them to ramble. Now, the other side of that is the breeders, of course, recognize that most people have small gardens nowadays. They can't afford the 20-foot rambler. So many cucumbers and even zucchini, butternut, yellow squashes, even watermelons have been bred so that maybe they spread 4, some say 3 feet. I don't believe it. 4 feet. So they can go in the garden maybe. But if you want a variety that rambles, or you like lots of them, this might be an option you want to try. So the wooden or plastic lattice that you can buy at the hardware stores, the big box stores, if you go there, or what used to be called sheep fence, made of metal, and they have the big 8-inch openings. You know, the bunnies go through. The deer can hop over them because they're only usually 4 feet tall. But for sheep, that they were made for sheep. And there's some around Old Farm still, maybe a farm store. Okay. Do we have pole beans or not? What was the other one she got? Oh, I think she got just peas.
Peas, yeah.
All right. We'll look at the peas and then we'll talk. All righty. Because I live with next to 10 acres of woods, I'm always pruning out brush along the edge of the driveway or certain places. So I have plenty of brush. So if you have that, they say that when you plant your peas, do it then. And I tend to be naughty and wait 2 weeks and do it when the peas come up. And once again, because of my windy hill, I put the row of brush about every 3 to 4 inches, and it's about 3 feet high. And if I have to, I prune the brush so it's just like 6 inches wide. I don't want it poking out into my path because then I just knock it over. So you shove it down 3 or 4 inches into the ground. For me, it's on the east side because the wind is usually out of the west. And so the pea vines tend to blow towards the east, and then they get tangled up in the brush and they stay upright. Now, I forgot to ask Rima to get the following, but I think you can all picture it. If you grow pole beans, which is also a wonderful way to save space, you simply make a teepee. 4 poles that are, I don't know, 8 or so feet high, and you make a teepee shape out of them, maybe a 4-foot diameter on the ground, or 3-foot diameter on the ground. And then each pole can have, I don't know, 2 to 4 beans that'll grow up it. And I like the idea of putting 1 or 2 morning glories in with the beans because they're so beautiful. Papa Ot is what we're going to get a picture of Papa Ot so they can see how beautiful it is. Maybe can you do that while I continue to babble on? Okay.
How do you spell it?
Papa, P-A-P-A, Ot, O-T-T. And I think it's from Pennsylvania or from Maine. And it's about 100 years old, and it's a morning glory, and it comes true to seed. And if we can get a color, there we go. Isn't that beautiful? And it's only about 3 inches in diameter. So it's not one of these massive things. And once you have it, it will self-sow, but it's not a weed. It's easy to control. And 2 years ago, somehow one got into my pumpkin patch, which once again is only two plants. And it just wound itself. It didn't grow up, but it grew up and through the mound of the pumpkin and squash vines. So I would suggest you buy, if you like those colors. Let's see. And of course, the TP, if you have grandchildren or kids that are little and still like that sort of thing, it can become their hideout. All right. Any other questions before I mention next time?
Nope.
Nope. Okay. If I'm correct me, Melanie, we're talking about butterfly gardens and edible flowers next time. All right. I have a PowerPoint on butterflies in the garden as basically for a couple of reasons. Scientifically, they're great pollinators. Aesthetically, they're flying flowers, beautiful to watch. And I'm combining that with, they eat the flowers and they pollinate, you could say the nectar or the pollen, like the bees. But we also have edible flowers that we can eat in our salads. And when my daughter was down, she's experimenting, and I cut off the buds of the chive, because you can eat the chive flowers as well as the chives. And she tossed 3 in her salad and said, oh, wow, that is a pop of onion taste. So and if you like that, that's great. Add a little zing to your salad. So that's what we're going to be doing next time. And I have a PowerPoint, so we'll see a lot more pretty pictures. And I think Ian got me some 4 or 5 edible flowers when he was here one Sunday. And so it should be there somewhere. Questions? What time is it? It must be close to.
It is, yeah.
Okay. So Christian, can you tell Lynn then how to she can put on her webpage how they can find the recorded? All right. And we're going to find out how many people have been listening in late and let her know. Okay. Yeah. All right. Yes. And I forgot your bread the other day, but it's in the freezer and I will bring it next time. It's okay. I was driving home and I thought, I forgot Christian's bread. It's okay. Next time. Next time. I won't eat it. Okay. You all set?
Bye, Christian.
Bye. Thank you very much. Have a good day. Yeah. Wonderful weekend.
You too.